Hey everyone, it's AC and I'm back doing another video. This video is being uploaded a little early today because I'm off because my little one had a trip at medieval times and they're not gonna have any bus service, so I have to pick him up from school. The topic I wanted to talk about today was parental relationships. I did a video maybe last week about co-parenting that a lot of people felt was helpful. 10 steps for co-parenting. If you haven't seen that yet, you can check it out on my page, Analysis of a Basketball Mom. Click like and subscribe so you don't miss a video. Today we're going to just talk about parental relationships, and this came up because one, I've been having a lot of conversations with people about relationships with their parents, and also Shaggy did a video on the Breakfast Club, and one of the things that he talked about was his relationship with his mom. And he was saying how his mother he doesn't really speak to his mother. He still takes care of her financially, but he doesn't really deal with her because she's emotionally abusive. And not only is she emotionally abusive to him, she's also emotionally abusive to his children. And he was saying that he does recognize that she doesn't realize maybe that what she's doing is abusive, and how he kind of he wants to have that conversation with her. And someone suggested therapy, but he's like, she's an old Jamaican lady, and ain't no old Jamaican lady talking about going to therapy. And I'm going to talk about that a little more further down the line. I tried to write some notes because sometimes I could be all over the place. So if you see me looking down, I'm just trying to stay focused. So yesterday I was speaking with my best friend, shout out to Jackie, and we were kind of talking about the whole parental thing. And I was saying a lot of times we don't realize, or we don't think that our parents had a whole life full of experiences and traumas and things like that before we became a part of their life. So there are a lot of things that they were dealing with or never really dealt with that are part of the person that they are, and how they parented and things like that. A lot of times people deal with sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and there's a difference between abuse and discipline. And it's something they don't talk about. Like, I've never really had a conversation with my mom about her childhood or anything that's bad that could have happened to her in her childhood, because a lot of times in families, especially families of color, there are just certain things that are not discussed. People don't talk about being abused and being molested. They don't talk about things like that. Those are things that stay quiet. A lot of people have families where there's a family member who is like the known molester, and they still can allow that person to be around the family. It's just like, oh, keep the kids away from so-and-so. It's just really like something that's not talked about. And also, a lot of families of color are not open to therapy. That's not something that we do. That's a white people thing, or you go to therapy if you're crazy. It's not something that's seen as a healing process for things that could have happened to you. So there are a lot of things that your parents may be dealing with that you don't know about. You might have a mother who's super overprotective and she doesn't let you spend the night over anyone's house under any circumstances, and you just feel like, well, it's not that serious. But the thing is you never know if something happened to her in her life where she doesn't want that to happen to you. And, the same thing can be with people being emotionally abusive and calling names and things like that. If they grew up in that environment, they might think, that's just a part of parenting. We were also talking about when you're a teenager. That's usually where the hard part comes between parents and child. You have a child that's kind of coming into their own, and the parents still trying to protect them and reel them in, and that's when start getting rebellious and all the hormones and all the stuff. And I remember being a teenager, and you feel like you know everything, or not everything, but you pretty much got things figured out, and your parents don't know anything, and for some reason you can't ever fathom the fact that your parents used to be your age. So you just see it as, oh, you're trying to ruin my life. You don't know what's going on, and there's a lot of bumping of heads. I mean, I bumped heads with my moms to a point because I knew that there was just a line not to cross. I let a lot of my frustration out in my diary. And I remember my mother saying to me one time that she read my diary. That's another thing. Parents don't really believe in privacy. So she read it, and I think I wrote something to the tune of that I hated her. And I can't ever say I really hated my mom, but I mean, as a teenager, you don't really know how else to express that. And I think about how that might have made her feel. I mean, she may have read it and said, oh, this girl, she a teenager, whatever. Or it could have been very hurtful to her to read that her child hates her because of, our relationship. But again, I'll get into that a little bit further down the line. A lot of us grew up with parents who grew up in the time where children were kind of like seen and not heard. And I don't think all of that is bad. Like, when I was younger and we were out or we went to someone's house and the adults were talking and the kids were in another room, we were not allowed to be in a room with adults, listening to adult stuff. If we heard adult things, that's because we were eavesdropping, but we were off with the kids. And that was just that. If you needed something, you had to come in and you had to say, excuse me, and all of that good stuff. And I don't think that that's bad. I think children don't have any business, knowing adult stuff, being around adult stuff. They need to stay where children are. But a lot of times, people also don't see the element of their child actually being a person. And a lot of times that comes with the whole, you got to do what I say because I said so. Because you don't see them as someone with a valid opinion and valid feelings. And that's something that I'm not going to say that I don't do, but I try not to do it all the time with my son. So in terms of my relationship with my mom was a single parent for a while, a long time, until she got remarried, because my biological father, I may have saw him, last time I saw him I was 6, and then he showed up when I was 23. That's another topic for another day. But he wasn't really around. He didn't support my mother financially. He just wasn't there. At some point, we had to move back and live with my grandmother because she was struggling. My mother was very affectionate. She always hugged me, told me she loved me, things like that. She was one of those parents, though, that she didn't explain stuff. You're in trouble. I said, do this. There was no explanation. I guess if ever she was wrong about something, she never really apologized for stuff. And it's weird because my mom got sick. My mom passed away from cancer in October of 2006. And what I found out later after she passed was that she was aware of how severe her diagnosis was. She just never told us. And I remember being at work and she and I getting into a little argument. And she called me back. And I remember rolling my eyes like, what is it now? She called me back to apologize. And I was so thrown off because it was not something that had ever happened before, and she was just saying how she apologized and she was just trying to look out for me, all this stuff. And that was something that never really happened. Now, also, after her death, I learned about the dynamics between herself and my grandmother. My grandmother wasn't a very affectionate person. I can't remember her hugging me ever as a child. And me being older, I can remember hugging her and her not feeling comfortable. Like, you could just feel how uncomfortable it was for her to be hugged. And I'm sure that had to do with something that happened to her, back in her childhood, but she was just not comfortable with affectionate. My grandmother was not apologetic at all about anything, and not to talk down on her, but one time she blatantly lied on me, and she never apologized for lying on me. I was an adult at this point, but she lied on me and she didn't apologize. Now, she would give you anything. You came over to the house, if it was some cheese or some crackers or a skirt, even if it didn't fit, a shirt, she was always trying to give you something, give you something. And I guess that was the way that she showed her love, but she wasn't very affectionate. And I think that was something that my mom longed for. And so that's why she gave it to me. And in turn, when I became a mom, there were things that I did differently. I'm still affectionate with my son, very affectionate. My son is extremely affectionate. He loves to hug and all that stuff. When he does get in trouble, I do explain things to him. Why you're in trouble, why you shouldn't do that, what you should do going forward, or what you should have done. Things that I explain that to him. Because I want him to understand really what it's all about. Another thing I do is I'm always pouring love into him. He's my favorite person in the world. I love him more than anything. One thing I also tell him is, there's nothing that you can do on this planet that will cause me to stop loving you, because that was something that scared me as a child. Although my mother never made it seem that way, I always felt like if I do something and she's not happy about it or she's not proud, she'll stop loving me. So that's something that I tell my son consistently, that even if when I'm mad at you and you're in punishment, even if I'm disappointed in you, that doesn't change the fact that I love you. And I feel like that's something very important to reiterate in your child, because they're going to make mistakes and they just still need to know that you're in their corner. Another thing that I'm different about with my son is we talk about things and I don't freak out about stuff. When I was 5, I was in kindergarten. I remember saying something to my mom about somebody having a boyfriend. And I mean, at what extent can you have a boyfriend in kindergarten? But she went crazy. Nobody's supposed to be having a boyfriend, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, whoa, okay. So I realized that boys was off limits. That conversation was off limits, and we're not going to talk about boys ever. And so as I got older and I started getting into boys, I was never comfortable with having that conversation with my mother, because I still remember when I was 5 and she blew her top. So a lot of times when my son asks me questions about stuff, even if I'm alarmed about why he's asking, I still remain calm. Well, why would you ask that? And then I talk to them. We had a funny conversation in the doctor's office. We were in urgent care. He had the flu, and in urgent care, they have all these different posters around. So they had a poster that said when to go to urgent care and when to go to emergency room. So in the urgent care one, it was like if you have a burning sensation during urination. And so my son is 11, and so he says to me, Mom, why would you have a burning sensation when you pee? So I'm like, okay. So I said, well, a lot of times people get that if they have a sexually transmitted disease. He's like, well, how do you get that? I said, well, if you have sex without protection, because I'm not going to pretend like my son hasn't heard the word sex or anything like that. He's 11. He's in middle school. And he's like, well, what kind of protection would you use? So I said, well, you would use a condom. And he's like, oh, like mayo? So now I'm confused, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, like mayo. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, you go to a restaurant and you ask for condoms. And I'm like, no, that's condiments. And then, we just both start laughing. So, we had a segue and we talked about that. And we talked about how if you engage in sex, you can get someone pregnant. And, he's like, well, what if I don't want to have a kid? And I pretty much told him, it's really not up to you. If you get a girl pregnant and she decides she's going to have a baby, you are going to be a father. So I'm like, the only sure way you can avoid, these STDs or this pregnancy is to not have sex at all. If you're not ready to deal with the consequences of that, just don't do it at all, period. But I'm not naive to think that my child is going to wait until he's grown to have sex. So it was like, if that's something, when you feel like you might be ready to go down that route, then we have to talk about protection. I talked to him about not listening if girls say she's on birth control, not because she could be lying, just because she's young and she might not be taking it correctly, all this stuff. And people might say, well, he's 11, but I feel like it's important to have the discussion now, especially since the topic came up. It's not like I just walked over to him. Because, again, I want him to feel comfortable in talking to me about stuff. I don't want him talking to a bunch of 11, 12-year-olds about stuff like that, and they don't know what they're talking about. Because as much as you feel like you protect your child from certain images, a lot of other parents are not. And these kids are in a space with your kids, and they're discussing stuff. So your child may be being exposed to stuff that you don't know about through their friends. So it's just best to have that communication with them. Now, I'm not naive to think that he's going to tell me everything, but I just want him to feel comfortable enough to ask me certain questions. And that's just something that I decided that I wanted to do different from my mom, because I didn't have that, and it could have saved me a lot of mistakes if I was able to talk to her and have those type of conversations. And there's so many people I know that don't have great relationships with their parents, and I can't necessarily relate. I mean, I don't have any relationship with my biological father, and that's more so because when he decided when I was 23 that he wanted to have a relationship, he tried to come in as the father. You need to treat me as the father. But to me, the fact that you contributed to part of my DNA, that's great and thank you. But you missed so many graduations. You missed college. I mean, my mother got remarried, and that's who I consider my father, because that's the person that took care of me. So you don't get to try to come in and rekindle this and try to act like you're supposed to get more respect than a stranger. This is not how it works. And then when I try to talk to him about, well, why weren't you around? And, what's going to be different now? What's different from then that you were thinking now? Because I'm not going to let you in my life now for you to decide that you're still going to be inconsistent. And he didn't really want to address that. He just wanted to say, well, I'm here now. And that wasn't good enough for me. And it's not that I had any animosity towards him or anything like that. But I just felt like you kind of owe me this explanation, and you feel like you don't. And so I just don't want to be bothered. I really don't. I think that maybe trying family therapy would help. But again, a lot of old school people are not with the therapy thing. They don't want to do it. Maybe if you don't have a good relationship with your parents, maybe you doing your own type of therapy. I'm actually looking into getting a therapist. The lady actually called me back, a lady that I reached out to, about getting therapy, because I just think sometimes it's good to talk to someone who's not particularly invested in you. A lot of times you talk to people you care about, and they care about you, so they trying to watch what they say, and they don't want to offend you, and they don't want to put you off. And sometimes you just need to just talk and let it out and be in a space where there's no judgment. Because in getting therapy, you can see where maybe you are doing the things that your parents did that you said you wouldn't do. For instance, my mother and I used to argue a lot about clothes. We would go Easter shopping, and I always liked these dresses with big bows or laces, and it always became an argument because she was not trying to buy it, and I was always ending up in tears. I mean, it was always drama, always. And the funny thing is that with my son, we used to buy sneakers before his father took me off sneaker duty. We used to go through the same thing. He would want some shoe that was ugly, and I'm like, I'm not buying that. And we would have that kind of back and forth. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, wow, it's funny how things repeat itself. And sometimes that's because now you can kind of see your parents' point of view, and that's something that's lighthearted. But a lot of times you're passing things on to your kid that your parents did that was extremely negative, and you don't even realize it because you don't sit back and say, whoa, that's what my mom used to do to me, and I didn't like it. And I think if you just go to therapy, that can open up your eyes to a lot of things. Also, not forgetting your childhood feelings when you're dealing with your own child. Especially when you're going through teenage years, thinking about how you wanted to be communicated with and treated when you were a teenager, and trying to give that to your teenager. And I also think it's important for you to be transparent with your children about things that have happened to you, or about experiences that you have had. Like, I have a conversation with my son about the fact that although you're supposed to be 21 when you drink, I tasted alcohol before I was. And I don't suggest that he does that. I don't give him alcohol. Now there's a difference, because when I was younger and we had New Year's Eve, we was drinking champagne. We wasn't drinking sparkling cider. I remember going to St. Thomas when I was like 16. And when we get off the plane, they had liquor and they was giving us liquor. So I don't give him liquor. I don't do that. But I'm just honest with him about certain things, because I feel like the key to any good relationship, being co-parenting, whether it being you and your parents, whether it being you and your child, your significant other, your friends, is open and honest communication, so that people can understand your point of view and understand where you're coming from and understand why. And a lot of times when I'm reprimanding my son for stuff, I will ask him, why would you do that? What was your thought process? And he tried to give me I don't know. And I'm like, you have to know. You have to know what you were thinking when you did what it was that you did. Because I'm trying to get an understanding here. So that's pretty much what I have. Parenting is not easy. If you're a parent, it's not. And it just didn't become hard when you became a parent. It was hard for your parents. And if your parents didn't really have the tools to know how to be a good parent, they could have messed up. I mean, I'm sure that there's things that I do that my son will say when he becomes a parent that he's not going to do. Like, I'm not going to do that. He might still end up doing it because later on he'll understand the method to the madness. But I just feel like family is a very important thing. You only get one mom. When she's gone, she's gone. You don't want to live life with regrets of having not at least attempted to mend, attempted to have understanding. But again, like I said, with the co-parenting, you can't control what other people do. You can only control what you do. So if you're not able to mend the relationship with your parents, and you are a parent, you could at least try to make sure that you pass on a healthy parental relationship between you and your child, so that when they become parents, they can become better parents. And that's all I have. Talk to you later.